everybody, to our coffee break, our last coffee break in June. Can't believe that this year is flying by. So today we are going to go over the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space Advisory, which used to be called the HHDS, if I remember correctly, and it no longer exists. So as a starting point, I wanted to show you really quickly the HHDS used to be up here somewhere in the middle. I moved it down to the 122 in the listing. So if you had a document in there, it will have moved down to the bottom on the listing. On the contract, it was up with the buyer advisories. I have now moved it down into the 463. So if there was a document in there, that's where it moved to. The new document, as it turns out, we thought it was going to be attached to the RPA and the RLA, and it's not. It's an individual document, and it is a document that basically acts as a disclosure, and it's very closely related to the TDS. So I put it find my stuff. I put it, here's the SBSA, TDS, SPQ, ESD, and then there it is right underneath, okay? So that's where you're going to find it on the checklist. It's in the listing side, 1 to 4 unit residential on the under contract. It's also in the mobile home in a park checklist, both listing and buyer side, and it's in this same spot as the 427 FHDS. Give me another year and I will have learned this. Okay, so a couple things to start with. This PDF right here you will find in my shared documents under disclosures 427 FHDS. And the reason I put it in there is not for the name and not that the disclosure is required, but because it has a CAL FIRE interactive map link. It's not really a link, I'll have to copy it and paste it, I believe. And then there's two numbers for CAL FIRE in here, which we will be discussing in a little bit. But that's what that is. I also put it in our chat, so you'll see it there. Okay, so the purpose of this form, as best as I'm understanding it right now, is that the law that affects and is causing this form to be used actually became law about a year and a half, 2 years ago, but its effective date is July 1st, 2021, and that's when we are required to be using it. It would have been nice to get this going a little sooner, but like all new documents with a time on them that when we're supposed to start using it, we wait till the last minute and then everyone's scrambling, trying to figure it out and how it is used and so forth. So I will tell you right now that I have read through this form probably about 6-7 times, but there are parts of it that are confusing, and there's parts that we're going to be learning as we go forward. But I can give you enough information to get you started and point you in the right direction. And then as we go forward and learn more about how some of this stuff is done, then we'll grow from there. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to go over the form. Oops. I'm not going to go too crazy on going over it, but I'm going to talk about the sections, and I'm going to point out a couple of things. First of all, it talks about what is applicable about this and what it applies to. And this fire hardening disclosure, defensible space, compliance, and inspection reports are really the three portions or parts of this advisory. And basically what it's saying is the disclosures specified in paragraph 3 down here are only required for sellers of residential properties, one that contain 1 to 4 units that are constructed before January 2010. And 3, if the seller is required to complete a real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS, and that are located either in a high or very high hazard severity, fire hazard severity zone. Now, the defensible space says the same thing. The inspection says the same thing. So they all basically say that this form is required under CAR directive for 1 to 4 unit single family that requires a TDS. So that means if the seller is an exempt seller, being a trust where the people are not living in the house, an REO, a probate, those would technically not need to provide this document. Okay. Now that is said, I'm going to counter it. For us to keep track of this, because if I have this hit and miss and people are supplying it's only when they say they're required, then I don't even know if the seller has done the disclosure. So we are basically saying that the FHDS is required on all files, whether or not it's in a high fire zone, whether or not it meets any of the applicability in section 1. And we're doing that purely because we want to make sure that every file has been done, and we want to make sure that the sellers have provided this. All right. So if it doesn't fit, you quickly go down to section 2B, check this box right here. The home is not in a high or very high severity zone, and you're done. Okay, but you need to make sure you check that. If the only ones that I am not going to expect this document in would be exempt sellers, because an exempt seller, I already know that we're not going to be, it's the same as a TDS. No one sends me something saying I don't have to supply a TDS. All right. But I will know that if it's an exempt seller, I will know if there's not an expectation of it being there. Okay. Otherwise, everybody else is expected to put it in. So where to locate the information? They give you some information here about that. And basically what it is saying is you can get the severity zone out of an NHD report, or you can contact your local or state agencies. Very honestly, you're going to be able to use the NHD report in probably 99% of the files. And what you do is you go into, I've got two examples of NHD reports here. Here's a disclosure source. And I found the easiest way to find the information is go to the disclosure statement page. And then you're going to, I guess I should make this a little larger. You're going to go and you're going to look for a very high, and these should always be in the same order, a very high fire hazard severity zone, okay? And this house here is checked as no. So as soon as you see that, you're going to go into the disclosure and you're going to go ahead and check number 2B, check that box. And now you've confirmed that it is not in a high severity zone. The other one that is basically looks the same. This one here, basically this one, oh, I guess they're not, because that one was the third one down and this is the second. An area, no, a very high fire zone. So it is the third one. Very high fire severity zone. And this one here also is checked as no. Okay. So those are going to be your easiest ways to find this out. But this is a disclosure that should be provided along with all other disclosures within the first 7 days after acceptance of offer. So getting the NHD report quickly and early is going to become very, very important. Scott Cooper has suggested that the NHD start being ordered by the seller or the seller's agent and have them done along with all their disclosures about the time that they're getting ready to put it in for a listing or before. I know that may be hard to sell to sellers that don't want to spend any money out of their own pocket, where they'd rather have this go into escrow and paid out of escrow, and so they never have to pay it directly that they notice. So, but that is a suggestion from Scott. But worst case, you need to, as soon as you open escrow, you say you need to order the NHD report and get it to me tomorrow. And there's absolutely no reason they can't get these fast. NHD reports are not something that they take days and days to actually calculate. They put the order in, click it, and it should be sent to you fairly fast. Okay. So item C basically says, even if the property is not in one of the high fire zones, the seller is unable to determine whether the property is covered. The seller may choose to answer some of these questions. So if they want to answer some of the questions below, or they know something that would be helpful, then they can go ahead and do that. Okay. So basically, when we get into section 3 and 4 is where this form starts getting confusing. And basically it becomes confusing when the NHD report says you are in a high fire zone, because at that point in time, now the seller has to answer some questions. And this is where it becomes a disclosure that the seller is responsible for completing. There's been some talk out there that it's because there's some things that the buyer is supposed to be doing, but this is a disclosure that should come from the seller, the same as you send your TDS and your SPQ from the seller to the buyer. There's a statement in here that the seller should read and understand. And then when the buyer goes through this, they should read and understand it. The seller then, if it's in a high fire zone, the seller then should try to answer questions in section B. And I'm not going to read through these in all sorts of detail, but it's the soffits and how they're protected and ventilated, the roof covering, what the material is, how close the landscaping is to the building and then an attached deck. If the windows are single pane, non-tempered glass, and then they go on to some other minor stuff. Okay, so basically these are important. If the seller can answer those questions, that's important for them to do. Then we get into defensible space. So the first one was fire hardening disclosure. So that is, I'm bouncing back and forth a little bit, but that is going to refer to section 1A1, fire hardening disclosure. The second section is going to be regarding the defensible space compliance. And defensible space basically is the area around your home or the home, and making sure that it is defensible, that the building is protected from a wildfire. And this is where I have read this and I start just, my eyes are glazing over at some point. But 4A just defines what defensible space is, maintained with 100 feet of the building. But then it starts talking about defensible space compliance. Okay. And what the answers, the bottom line answers appear to be here is that the seller needs to determine if there is a local ordinance or a state ordinance or someone who is in charge of defensible space for their property. Okay. And that, and I'm not going to beat up this section 4 because I'm going to confuse everyone real good if I try to. But the first thing the seller is going to want to do is determine who's in charge of their property, if anybody. And it appears the best way to do that, and I'm going to go back to this document that I put into the shared documents. There's 2 CAL FIRE numbers here. And I have not done this, but apparently you call these numbers and you tell them where you are located, address. I don't know if they're going to go by address or APN number, so I would be ready and have both. And then find out if CAL FIRE has any jurisdiction over the property. If they don't, then you're going to ask them, who do I call next to determine jurisdiction? And from my understanding, they can help point you in the correct direction. All right. So, and I'm sure this is going to get more efficient with time, but right now it's not. Okay. The other thing that you can do when you start looking into jurisdiction is there's an interactive map. And where did I hide? This is an interactive map, and that's that. I've given you the link to it right there. And basically all you do is jump into this map, start double clicking so you get down to your area. Okay. So here we are at the south end of the Antelope Valley, which of course is where the fire, if you look north, there's nothing, okay, until you get up into the Hatchapies. So if you're anywhere in Rosamond, Lancaster, and until you get down along the foothills, there is no fire zone at all. But now You'll see there's different colors in here. So the red is a high fire zone in a local responsibility area. What that means is it's not under CAL FIRE, but it may be under the County of Los Angeles. It may be within Palmdale. So my guess is that if CAL FIRE says it's not ours, then you go into the county. You're going to be trying to get a hold of the county or the city and find out, do you handle this? Do you do inspections on it? Do you help with doing the inspections of the defensible space? Okay. So also on here, you'll see, so that's LRA is a local responsibility area. SRA is a state responsibility area. So all of this, rest of this along the foothills is all state. Everything through Acton is all state responsibility. And so then these colors of very high and high kick in. All right. All right. So you'll see that this area through Little Rock, basically where the fire burned last summer, is a high fire zone. Okay. You get up into the Acton and the Hills area, and it becomes a very high area. Down along Lake Elizabeth Road, it's a very high area. So I think it's not to use this map as much to determine if your specific property is in that area, though if you're in the middle of one of these zones, you'll be able to get your answer pretty quick. But it also helps point to who you're looking for responsibility. So if I live in this area right here, I know that that's a state responsibility area. So when I call CAL FIRE, they should know about the property and they should be able to give me answers. But if I'm in this area here, which is a local responsibility area, they're not going to know anything, and they're going to point us, I'm hoping, to LA County or the city of Palmdale. Okay. And if I'm being vague, it's because that's as good as I can give you in terms of definition right now. And we will have to learn this as we go along. And one thing is that as you have clients that have to say, I'm in a high fire zone, and have to get some of these answers, it would be really good to get feedback from you guys so that we know that what the processes were, and we can help going forward to be more efficient with this. Okay. All right. So really the last part, you get the seller's got to say if it's a dispensable space, and if there's been an inspection, the seller is responsible for providing that inspection, and so forth. But there's also situations in here where if you're representing the buyer who is buying this property that falls in a high fire zone, the buyer is notified in here that they are going to be having to figure out going forward defensible space plans, how to get the inspections and so forth. And it basically turns over the responsibility to the buyer once they have purchased the property, because at that point they're the owner and they are responsibility for compliance with the defensible space laws, whether it's state level or local level. Okay, so make sure that you understand, as a seller, you need to their seller needs to fill out this and answer it to the best of their knowledge. And some of the sellers that are in the middle of these high fire zones already are aware of it and already getting inspections and have more information and knowledge because they're living in the middle of it and they know from their neighbors and their local communities more about it, okay? But remember, if you're representing the buyer moving into this property, the buyer is going to need to be aware that they're going to be taking responsibility. And if a fire, if inspections have not been set up, but are going to be heading that direction, which I'm assuming every high fire zone will be heading that direction, the buyer is going to need to realize that they're going to be involved in this, and they're going to have to, they can't just move in and think they're living in a tract in Palmdale. There is going to be responsibility, and that responsibility follows with the property, and whoever owns that property is going to be responsible for handling the process going forward. Okay. And then this talks about the final inspection report, which, very honestly, I do not know what that final inspection report is at this point in time, though it may be a report that it may be an inspection that the seller has received, and they're checking this box and saying, yes, I've received an inspection, and attached is a copy of it, or here's where you can get a copy of that report. Okay. So if I've confused all of you, I apologize. But in short, what we are doing now, or what we've moved around, is you have a new location for the FHDS. It's now under line item 427. Okay. It is, unless you are an exempt seller, we are expecting the disclosure on every 1 to 4 unit residential property, whether or not it's in a high fire zone. Okay. Now, that includes mobile homes. Now, obviously, a mobile home on land is a single family, so that's a no-brainer. But a mobile home in a park fits the definition of a residential property, 1 to 4 units. Okay. And it probably, most of the mobile homes are older than 2010. Okay. So, and by the way, this January 2010, the building codes changed at that point in time, and the building perimeters are required to be designed to be fire hardened to a larger degree. Okay. So your soffits and your ventilation and your apparently dual pane windows help. So we all pretty much had dual pane, but maybe not everybody. Okay. So be aware of this. And I did go in this morning and I added that to both 1 to 4 unit residential and to the mobile home in a park. Okay. This does not pertain to land. All right. It might pertain to a commercial property that has a residence on it in a high fire zone. Okay. So you want to kind of watch there too, and don't think, oh, it's a commercial, I don't have to worry about it. Because we have a lot of commercial properties that have a residence on the property, and that is going to cause it to be covered by the fire hardening.